The December ACT is coming up this Saturday, so for this week, we're going to feature just ACT videos. So go ahead and try this reading question. Which of the following sentences best summarizes the first paragraph? So this one's a little bit tricky, but I think the lesson for this video is when you're summarizing, you want to make sure that your summary contains nothing that isn't expressly in the actual passage. And we're going to see in some of these choices features that don't actually quite work with what we read, and we're looking for the one that best fits and summarizes what this paragraph is trying to do, trying to say. So let's see. The time is overdue to admit that there is something of a vacuum in women's poetry, and that we abhor it. For a woman to concede this is not disloyal to her sex. It's the first step in the creation of an environment in which women artists will flourish. But what can be done about the fact that the list of beloved women poets is not as long as the list of beloved poets who were born male? So how would we summarize this? And I think it's useful to try to summarize it yourself before you go to the choices. Not only as an exercise, but also it's a good way to help you cut through the choices a little bit more quickly. So I would say to summarize this paragraph, basically saying that we have to admit that there's not many women in poetry. It's not a bad thing to do this. In fact, it's necessary, right? It's the first step to creating an environment in which women will flourish. And what can be done about this issue? What can be done about the fact that women aren't as prominent in poetry as men? Let's go to the choices. F, it is disloyal to encourage women to write and to ask, why do male poets flourish more readily than female poets? This is actually the opposite of what's said in the passage. Now, don't get sucked in by the word disloyal, which it says here, because in fact, if you read the sentence, it says that women are not disloyal if they admit this, if they admit that there aren't many women in poetry. So first things first, they don't say it's disloyal. And if we actually go to what this choice is saying, it is disloyal to encourage women to write and to ask this. I mean, really, is it disloyal to encourage women to write? That doesn't really even make sense with anything that would work with this paragraph. So for that reason, we can get rid of F. G, we must ask why there are so few women writers. Perhaps asking this question will help create a women-centered culture. So this one looks pretty good, but when you peel back the layers, when you really dive into the choice, you'll see that it actually doesn't fit very well at all. For example, notice it says we must ask why there are so few women writers, which may seem on the surface to work, right? This passage is talking about why there aren't many women in poetry. But women writers isn't exactly correct. It's women poets. Again, it's a small difference, but it does make a difference, right? We're not talking about writers generally. We're talking about poets. So we would expect in our summary to talk about poets, talk about poetry, not about writers, women writers in general. So that doesn't work very well. The next part also is a little bit strong. Perhaps asking this question will help create a women-centered culture. That's trying to draw on this portion of the text where it says creation of an environment in which women artists will flourish. Just because it says we want to create an environment where women artists will flourish doesn't mean that it's a women-centered culture. Again, it's a bit too strong, a bit too broad. So I would think with this choice, it's too strong and it's too broad. It doesn't capture specifically what's going on in the passage, so we'll get rid of it. It can be liberating to ask questions such as, what can be done about the fact that there are fewer beloved male poets than female poets? First problem, the passage isn't really talking about liberation or that asking these questions is liberating. It's more about once we've asked these questions, what can we do to fix the problem? Second, it's contradicted because here it says that there are fewer beloved male poets than female poets, and that's exactly the opposite of what we saw in the passage. There are fewer women poets than male poets, so we can safely get rid of H. J, if we admit that there is not enough quality poetry written by women, it can make it easier to discover why this is so and help us change the situation. So this nicely captures what's going on in the paragraph. Notice we admit there's not enough quality poetry written by women, right? That is basically the first sentence. It can make it easier to discover why this is so. Notice, again, we come back to this phrasing. It's the first step, right? The first step in the creation of an environment in which presumably women poets will do well. So that would be a way to discover how to do this. And then the next sentence, but what can be done about the fact there's your idea about changing the situation. So this nicely maps onto what's going on in this paragraph as a whole. So we're going to go with choice J. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.